Hey girl, welcome to the Feminine Founder podcast, where we are all about learning and growing professionally so that we can build a life that we are proud of and really love. My name is Caroline, and I'm a LinkedIn expert, obsessed with teaching female entrepreneurs how to start, grow, and scale their personal brand and business on LinkedIn. This podcast is all about sharing our stories and learning from each other on how to navigate our professional journey so that we can live our best lives. So if you are just starting your entrepreneurial journey, or if you are growing and scaling an epic company, you are in the right place, friend. Today, I have Kaitlin Borncamp with me. Kaitlin is a CPA turned nutritional therapist. She helps high achievers align with their health so they can have a life that they feel great. Welcome, Kaitlin.
Hi, Caroline. It's great to be here with you today.
So I'd love to hear your story. I love everything that you're doing now and your entrepreneurial journey, but I also know that you are a former CPA and you worked at a Big Four company. And I want to hear the story of all of your career and then how'd you pivot into your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a pretty unique journey, I would say, a CPA turned certified nutritional therapist. You don't hear that every day. And I know a lot of my colleagues were kind of surprised when you're working in Big Four consulting. It's very unusual to say, hey, I'm going out on my own, let alone in the nutrition space. So yeah, how it kind of started for me, I think like a lot of us high achieving women, I definitely identify as a perfectionist and an overachiever. So I feel like I did all the things, right? I went to college, I got the good job, had a really great team and company that I worked for with tons of benefits. And along the way, I had always had a really deep passion for nutrition and health and wellness, which really kind of, started back years ago when I was experiencing, some deeper depression. And I was actually experiencing an eating disorder, which now I can say I'm really grateful for because at the time I was approaching food from a place of shame. I really viewed food as the enemy. And I was fortunate enough to find weightlifting and CrossFit at the time. So that's kind of how I got into nutrition and really started to understand and appreciate how impactful food is for our body. I always like to say that, protein powder was kind of my gateway supplement into the industry because at the time I was just, back then it was like bodybuilding.com and we were kind of limited on the information, but I was fortunate enough to find a book on the paleo approach and I was just infatuated with it. I was so interested. So I kind of played around with it on my own for a while. And around that time, I had kind of the first experience that was really, really shifted things for me, which was doing a challenge. So I did a challenge where I cut out alcohol and I, incorporated some supplements. And I started to feel so much better. I lost weight around my waist, but more than anything, I lost inflammation. My brain started to get much more clearer. And without that experience, I don't think I would have started to have the appreciation that food and, nutrition really does have on our body. And so, yeah, it had been, like I said, a passion on the side for a long time where I think a lot of my colleagues were interested in learning more about tech and the different topics of consulting at that time. I was always listening to health podcasts and reading all the books and things. At one point, my friends would kind of joke with me and they're like, Kaitlin, do you ever read for fun? I'm like, what are you talking about? I am reading for fun. All my nonfiction health books, I just find it so interesting. So there I was, working in consulting and, largely content, I would say, with kind of my life. I had achieved high degree of success. Like I said, I was working with great teams, really high caliber people. And a couple things kind of clicked for me. One of them was that I learned that doctors in this country really get very little to no nutrition training. It would shocked me because, we hold doctors to such a high regard, right? And it goes doctors, lawyers, CPA. Like in my mind, it's kind of like that level, if you will. And that really surprised me. So then I started to wonder, well, if they're not learning about nutrition, which I felt like I already had kind of a base level of understanding, what are they learning about? Right. And so I started to kind of learn a little bit more about how those programs are set up and kind of the funding that goes on within that organization. And then also the second thing that I learned that really surprised me was around the area of mental health. So one of the popular doctors in this space, Dr. Daniel Amen, pointed this out. And he actually said, psychologists are one of the only doctors in the space that don't look at or scan the underlying organ that they're working on. In this case, it's the brain. And so, having my own experience with depression over the years and, kind of my own experience with mental health, that also really intrigued me. So that kind of connected the dots in terms of where physical health meets nutrition, meets mental health. And at that time, I just kind of felt called to get involved in a better way. And so I got formally certified. I founded my business. And yeah, here I am today. We're doing it full time and I absolutely love it.
Okay, so two new things I learned about you, and thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate you being open and honest about what you went through that kind of pivoted or started this whole path for you. I am a CrossFitter too. And I also love and follow Dr. Amen. So we have two commonalities there. Okay, so you're working as a CPA, you're working at a big four firm, have all the big fancy things, the team, the benefits, the big salary, like check all the boxes. Great. You have gone on this health and fitness journey on the side as a side hustle. You've gotten certified as a nutritionist, all the things. What was the actual catalyst or event that happened in your life that was like, all right, I need to go out and pursue this as a full-time gig?
Such a great question. I think for me, it was around, I was at a point in time in my career where I was up for promotion to the next level. And I just didn't feel aligned to it for, at the time I wasn't super clear, but I remember listening to a podcast and somebody was talking about if the next level in your current position is not a full body yes, then you need to go do something else. And I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so I think upon reflection, I actually spent a lot of time reflecting on this. I talked to a lot of different people within my organization about that promotion to understand what that path would look like, kind of confirming some things I previously thought and clarifying some others, as well as I talked to some other people, just to get some support around what would it look like if I went into my business full time and kind of what do I need to do. Obviously got the support of my closest, my friends, family, and my partner. So yeah, that was a big realization for me. And it was a big jump. It's a huge leap of faith for sure.
Yeah. So telling me about your approach to health and fitness. I mean, we talked about the mindset piece too, and I think the mindset piece is so huge because a lot of people get busy, they have life, they have kids, they have their jobs, all the things, and it's like health, fitness, working out, it's like on the back burner. So, what is your approach to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I take the approach of first understanding what it is you want to do and how it aligns to your current goals, because I think that we have such an information overload currently on all topics, but especially health and wellness. So I would say it's not an information problem, it's a lack of implementation problem. But much in the way that most people in the functional health space believe that the body does everything for a reason, I also believe that the mind is included in that. So from a habit perspective, I believe, and from my own experience, that if we're not doing a certain things, it's because we're not either motivated enough or we don't have clarity on the consequences of not doing it. So very quickly, the first thing that I work on with clients is understanding where are you at currently, what are your goals, and what's the deeper why behind that? Because somebody can come to me with the same goal. Let's say it's, a woman who wants to lose the last 10 pounds, right? Like, we all kind of have. I want to lose less than pounds. Well, that reason may actually be two very different reasons. Like for one, it may purely be, like I'm about to get married. I really do just want to focus on how I look. It is really important to me to look really good for those photos, the honeymoon, all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's one. The second one, it may actually be totally different. It may be that she wants to look in the mirror and finally love herself for the first time in her life. So those are going to be two totally different approaches, and her kind of commitment to those things will be based on her deeper why. And then beyond that, yeah, we can nerd out, Caroline, and kind of talk more about like specific tactics for nutrition. I also do blood work with clients and things like that too.
No, go into all of it because I am with you and I love all those things. All of those things that you're talking about, I think are super important. I think it's super important if you're a business owner or if you're an employee. I mean, it all needs to be a holistic approach if you want to feel good and have a lot of energy.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, I think that from the way I see it is that I believe that we each have our own personal responsibility to be healthy. And kind of you had asked the question before, the catalyst for leaving and going into my business. But the reason why I started this specific business is because of that reason. I think that there's so much that's working against us in our daily life to make it hard to be healthy. Like, again, it's not our fault why we feel like we lack motivation, quote unquote, to not eat all the things, when let's actually have some appreciation. I'm laughing. It's not really that funny, but there is somebody's job who's out there in each of those food product companies as a food scientist to make those chips the perfect amount of crunchy and salty, right? And to make that, popcorn the perfect amount of buttery and sweet and stuff like that. So we need to have a little bit more appreciation of the current environment that is. And the element you mentioned around kind of tying it into our performance on a daily basis. I mean, that was a lot of my story. Like I really got into, okay, how does the gut connect to the brain and mental health and also performance? Because I know that if I, the more things I do to feel good, the better I will think and the better I will be able to perform on the day, the next day. And I think pretty early on, I'm kind of fortunate in the sense that I think early on for me, I was always like, what diet is Kaitlin on? Or, Caitlin's not drinking during brunch today, right? I'd show up to the girls' brunch and they always kind of knew, they're like, Kaitlin, are you drinking today or not? Like sort of this question. But I think for me, I learned early on that if I do things that make me feel crappy, like I feel really crappy. Like I think that I'm a little bit more sensitive than some people, or maybe it just hit me earlier in life. I really don't know. Either way, I'm kind of fortunate for it because I remember just on the topic of something like sleep, there was days where, I'd be out with friends or colleagues and we'd go into the office the next day and I was dragging and I couldn't just rely on having an extra cup of coffee because it would make me feel extra buggy. That feeling where you get just super, like you're almost like wired, but you're like empty inside. You're like, this is not how it's supposed to be. It's like, yes, because you're lacking on sleep and that's when the brain cleanses itself. So yeah, I think that there are so many things that we can do in our daily life and the approach is everything because kind of going back to that, I think what a lot of people think that nutrition is, especially women, like I fell under this. I went from an eating disorder to disordered eating. And what I mean by that is that I, thought that I was kind of in the clear, but really what I was doing is I was still counting every single calorie. I remember this was like before my fitness pal and I had this little log, almost like a journal, but man, it wasn't a very nice journal because I would just track all the food I ate and all the calories that I had. And then I would kind of deduct from that all the calories that I burned that day, almost like this lot, like this calculation in my mind every day. I'm like, that is so unhealthy, And so we think that nutrition is calories in, calories out, and that's a portion of the equation. But especially with women, we really need to consider things like hormones. We need to consider your light exposure on a daily basis, your circadian rhythm, your sleep, all of it. And so that's kind of one big gripe that I have with the health and wellness industry is that's been one sort of, I don't even want to use the word truth, but that's been one thing that people think is a truth that we just haven't been able to kind of like detach ourselves from.
Okay, all such great points. I want you to go off. I want to hear what a perfect healthy day is to you or should look like.
Yeah, I love this question because I do think that this is a perfect consulting answer, Caroline, which is it depends. But
That's
no,
okay.
seriously, I'll give you a couple examples. Like I think it of course depends on your goal and what you and your body need, but like I can give my couple examples for me and a client or two. So for me, like a perfect healthy day is something where I'm waking up relatively early, ideally with, no alarm or near my alarm time. And I'm spending a couple minutes in the morning drinking some water, like first thing, like I brush my teeth, go to the bathroom, drink water for sure. Next up, I'm probably doing a combination of journaling, red light therapy, or reading, ideally all three if I have time. And then I also like to do some sort of movement. So most recently, like this would be a really good thing for people in the winter months, is do something inside, including you could do animal moves. There's a couple of great YouTube channels that have just like they're free animal moves. Basically just mean like you're kind of moving around like a kid. You're like doing the crab walk, you're doing the bear walk, you're just doing things to kind of move your body. It really helps lubricating your joints. So something with movement. If you're able to, a walk is also great too. But the animal moves specifically help with mobility, not just, expenditure of the calories. And then from there, definitely having some like for me, I'd be bored sitting around all day. So I love to do something like constructive, working, reading, learning, talking to people, like whatever that is. Definitely having in between that time, 3 well-balanced meals, all with vegetables. So that's another thing that kind of sets me apart from a lot of people is that, you need to be incorporating several vegetables with each meal. And I always say prioritize protein. So that's the number one thing with each meal, prioritize protein. You don't need to weigh all your calories. There's a couple different things you can follow just to do that. And then, throughout the rest of your day, I mean, that's the thing. There's so many different ways that it can follow. Hopefully you have some time in there to connect with other people too, like people that are important to you. That's really important. Again, getting some time outside for a period of time. And then in the evening after dinner, having some time to kind of wind down. So that's another area where I would say morning time and evening time are kind of the most common where it gets off balance from a health perspective, in my opinion, because in the morning time, I'm a victim of this too sometimes. Like we just want to check our email first thing, and that's going to put our brain right into like on mode right away when really we should be giving ourselves our own personal time for at least like 30 minutes. And similarly at night where, we shouldn't be using the big overhead lights about an hour or two before bedtime, ideally after sunset. So I know for our house specifically, we love having the dimmer switches and, we use technology to our advantage. So we have it set right at, I think it's 7:30 right now. All the overhead lights go on and the soft lights come up. And then in the bedroom, I have a couple of little salt lamps as like little night lights in the bathroom. So I love to use that when I'm washing my face and doing my nighttime routine. And then similarly for the bedside table, I just have a really warm light in there. So don't use any overhead lights that night.
I love that you talked about the lighting too, because I think that's important. And we have dimmers on our switches too. And I make sure they're not at full blast, like first thing in the morning or, within an hour of when we're going to bed. I think that matters in a huge ways because it just helps my body like come back or come down either way, whichever one I'm trying to achieve. Okay. So if someone is listening to this podcast and they own a business, maybe a small business, medium size or large business, why is it important that number one, they take care of themselves? And number two, why is it important that they have healthy employees?
Such a great question. So for you and your health, the thing to remember is that you're not a robot. Like I talk to, executives all day long, business owners that are saying that they drink less than 40 ounces of water a day. And I'm like, you need to be drinking upwards of 80 to 100 ideally. So so one super simple example. Let's do macro. We could do micro first example and then macro. But so the micro example on the topic of hydration would be, think about every single function in your body relies on the cellular health. And your cells, let's think of them as a chia seed, right? That would be a fully hydrated one. They can move freely amongst each other. They can communicate really easily. Contrast that with a raisin. It's all dried, it's wrinkly, they're kind of sticking to each other, right? It's like, so it's a one simple example where when you're hydrated, your entire body is going to function much better, the chia seed, versus if you're dehydrated and you may be foregoing drinking that water. What I get told all the time from the people I talk to is they don't want to take the water breaks. So that's how it shows up in our life, is that we're like, I'm only drinking 30 ounces of water a day, Kaitlin, because I don't have time to take water breaks. You absolutely do have time and you need to prioritize it. A macro kind of, taking a step back would be that your body is so resilient, it actually works against us sometimes. And what I mean by that is that if we feel like we're able to get away with things, like we're able to not prioritize our health because that consequence hasn't quote unquote caught up to us yet, right? For days, weeks, sometimes even years for people. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do now, is because I was literally seeing so many smart professionals trade their health for their wealth, where they would make these seemingly unconsequential trade-offs every single day, working the extra hour, foregoing that drink of water, not going for the walk in the afternoon, because each individual day, it doesn't seem to matter, but over weeks, months, and years, it absolutely stacks up. And, you don't have to spend too much time with an elderly member of your family or someone close to you to realize how much time they're spending just on filling their prescriptions, going to doctor's appointments, or just sitting in pain, right? And so it will catch up to us. And I would say for a more the point that we can also utilize now is that when you do support your health on a daily basis, nutrition, movement, sunlight, all of that, you are going to think much clearer. You're not going to rely on caffeine as much for energy. You're going to have less anxiety. You won't have as much jitters, things like that. I think there's a lot of probably symptoms that people experience, but are sort of not talked about in the corporate world. For example, like just to like lighten the mood here a little bit. I remember one time I was sitting in a cubicle. This was before COVID, when our office still had cubicles and I was in there. And, just to get like personal for a moment, I was experiencing the worst gas that day. And it was so uncomfortable, right? It was really distracting. I had to excuse myself frequently to go to the restroom, right? And we don't talk about things like that. Like we think about these business statistics that are all sexy, where it's like, oh, it takes 7 minutes to, reset your focus for every time you're distracted. I'm like, okay, well, what about hunger pains? What about gas? What about, a headache, right? Like those are all distractions too. But in the corporate space, it's almost like anything related to your body or health is like off. Like it's not allowed. It's not allowed to be talked about. Women don't have periods. Like you have to hide your tampon when you're going to the bathroom. Like just weird stuff like that, where I'm like, okay, so already in the corporate space, we kind of have this assumption that humans are robots. So again, it's not our fault. We just have to understand that like this is the lay of the land. And so I want to also answer the second part of your question, which is as leaders and business owners, why is it important? Why is it valuable for your employees to be healthy, right? And a lot of the same things apply. But I would say from a greater perspective is that you'll be able to have less turnover, right? That's really costly for you to be able to hire when you have to hire and retrain employees who leave, who aren't as happy. So you'll have happier employees. You'll have less sick care costs, right, from health insurance. They won't take as much sick days. They also won't take, there's another measurement in the well-being space called absenteeism, which is actually in between when they take a sick day and they're actually still showing up to work, but they're not operating at their 100%. That's called absenteeism. And that's the real risk to employers, because I think because we're so virtual nowadays, most of us, if we're like kind of sick, I'm like, I have a cold, but it doesn't bother anyone because I'm in my own home office type thing. You're still going to work. But what capacity is that employee functioning at? Like not, you ever get those
Probably less than 30, I would say.
Yeah. And you're not going to remember much, right? And so that's the whole thing too. Like if we talk about it from just the pure stance of like what you're going to invest in training, even your time alone for training any team member what if that person wasn't able to remember like 80% of it? Well, that's what lack of sleep does. You don't process that memory and secure it as long-term memory in your brain. So just the foundational health habit of sleep is absolutely required. But where is that talked about in corporate training, right?
So how do we normalize, maybe in the entrepreneur space or in the corporate space, having these conversations? Because no one wants to talk about like, hey, I'm bloated or have gas today, or hey, on my period, or hey, I'm in a mood because my husband and I just had an argument this morning. I mean, like, how do we make it a safe space so that employers are aware of these things?
Mm-hmm. I think it kind of comes at the approach of making sure that your employees have the right resources and culture. And I mean that in the sense, I talk to a lot of companies who have great resources, but their culture doesn't always empower their employees to take advantage of them. So I think there's a couple different things that they can do, but one thing that's free is simply just allowing that person to know that they have the freedom over their, schedule and ability to ask for, an hour off if they need to just take a break. Like, for example, it's okay to schedule lunch in your day. Like, please let your employees be okay with taking and encourage them. Everyone should be encouraging each other to take a lunch break. Even if it's just 30 minutes to go sit somewhere and eat lunch. So I think there's a lot of different things that can be done at the tactical level. I have a lot of ideas on that, but more from the cultural level, I think that's important. We don't need to, I know if you're, a business owner, we don't need to start normalizing, digestion talk every day. Like it's not going to get to that point. We don't even need to do that. So don't worry. But what we do need to do is to make sure that those employees we have a conversation where it's being talked about in the corporate space so that we start to connect the dots that, hey, you are, as a human, you're an asset to this company. And because you're a human, we care about your health. As simple as that, right? And have measures in place, such as doing wellness workshops to make sure it's top of mind. I know a lot of the topics I speak on with teams are things that are, often kind of overlooked in the corporate space. Like one of those is around, stress resiliency, right? Another one is around how can you eat for energy as a busy professional? Like what are some really quick tips that we can do? Because I can't tell you how many people, again, we just scarf down lunch, right? And so that's something where, going back to my days of calorie counting, it's like, even if you counted the perfect meal with the perfect amount of protein, if you go scarf that lunch down, you're not going to be digesting it. You're not going to be in a relaxed state to digest it properly. So it's not going to be its full effect.
Okay. I literally worked at a place that basically they didn't allow you to take a lunch. We were in a cubicle environment and it was a huge international, has a big name, corporate company, all shiny and everything from the outside. On the inside, I remember I was like ready to go outside and going to walk to take a lunch, and like everyone looked at me like I was crazy and like gave me the stank eye. And so I was basically shamed to go get lean cuisines and keep them in the freezer and microwave them and eat at my desk, and it was so freaking unhealthy.
See, that's the culture I'm talking about. Even having a written culture is not enough. It needs to be the colloquial culture of like what is actually said and done, because man, there's nothing more powerful than shame, public shaming onto someone else. Oh my goodness.
I did not last long in that company. That was a big part of it.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry you had that experience. I'm so glad I think that's more of like the few now, hopefully. But I think the more common thing that I see, especially with women too, is because we're like, I just work a little bit longer, like just these last few emails or just this last ping or whatever I have to do. And so oftentimes we're operating under these like self-induced deadlines. And so that's a big thing that I work on with people is, okay, let's understand your actual stress load. Like how much of this is self-induced? How much of your deadlines are you creating in your mind? Can you ask or just tell someone, hey, it's right now, right? It's Thursday afternoon, I feel like I need to work through lunch. Instead of having it to them today by end of day tomorrow, Friday, tell them, hey, would it be okay if I get this to you on Tuesday? Most of the time, I mean, you'll have professional discernment to know if there's like a real deadline. Like in my world coming from, tax and accounting, there was real deadlines with client financials filed with the SEC and the government. So yes, those are big deadlines. But for most of your things on a day-to-day, like project load or client load, people are pretty forgiving. And so if you just learn how to kind of better manage your workload, you should be able, most people most days should be able to get in lunch.
I agree with you. It's all about managing expectations. So what is lighting you up with some of the clients that you're working with right now?
Yeah, I think the continuous glucose monitors that we use is really insightful. So one of my clients, we had chatted a bit before we had him implement it, and I talked to him about the stress response in the body, and that's one overlooked area of blood sugar is actually how having high stress can increase your blood sugar. And so when he started using it himself, we were looking at one of his monitors one day. He shares the dashboard with me, and we look at it in our coaching session. And I pulled it up. We chatted about it. His dinner, had a spike for the meal that he ate. That's expected. And then he had another bigger spike after dinner at like 10 p.m. And I said, what was going on that night? Did you have like an after dinner drink or, did you exercise? What happened? He's like, oh, I actually checked my email right before bed. And to this day, Caroline, I've been working with him for the last 6 months. I just met with him last week, and I had asked him, how's it going? Those insights that you got from the CGM. And he said, I still never check my email at night. So it's so cool to see that having that experience, again, it's kind of like me having that first experience from that food challenge I did. I couldn't have known how this information actually works until you experience it. So seeing clients experience those changes in their own body and in their own data is really cool.
So as we wrap up, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, Kaitlin Borncamp on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active and where you'll find all the relevant things that I got going on.
Thanks, Kaitlin.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks so much for having me.